This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Nathan.
Be still, my beating heart. A Gen 3 razor has arrived. No, it's not a 1-10 made in the US. It's in fact the 6-36. This is graciously sent in by Patreon provider Nathan. Nathan, very similar to Scott, loves to spend way too much money on his guns, and for that, I thank him wholeheartedly. Nathan made sure to expedite this to me as quickly as possible so I can try to get all the filming done with it before the range closes for the off-season, which is from mid-December to basically the end of January. So, all of you viewers, let Nathan know just how much you appreciate him in the comment section below. Right from the jump, you know we are in Vortex's top-of-the-line Razor model box, because it is just, well, not only does it clearly say Razor, but it is a big, beautiful, massive piece of kit. Well, that has magnets that hold the flap down. A little blurry, I know, I apologize, but there's all the information you're going to need to know on this thing. So, if you're paying attention, you notice a time jump on my watch, or the cup of coffee that's now been added to frame. That's because my infant decided he was going to wake up and alert the entire building that he was up and not happy. I didn't mention the price. These are like around $3,000, which is a large uptake from their Gen 2 4.5 to 27s, which could be had for brand new, almost like half the price. But you can find these things for less than $3,000. Anyway, we already looked at the box from the outside. Cracking this thing open, you can very clearly tell this is a Gen 3 6-36. We have product manual and reticle manual. Just to talk about the reticle real quick, this is the 7D, which we've already showcased, I believe, with the Strike Eagle and my Venom. It's an excellent tactical reticle. Going over the owner's manual, there isn't a whole lot to this that we're going to really need to know. All this information you could find online. And that's basically it. The rest of this should be pretty standard, with the exception of setting your zero stop and your turret alignment, which we might talk about a little bit later, but for right now, it's irrelevant. Now, I do believe that it came with the Vortex Defender caps, but it also comes with, just like what we saw on this guy, because I'm filming these two side by side, the exact same sort of plastic caps that just go over the front and rear objective. And there's also going to be the sunshade, which we don't really care about. In here, we have a throw lever, which is included. About damn time, Vortex, especially for the price. This is aluminum, and it says on the side, made in the USA. We also have the most batteries I've ever seen in an optics box. 1, 2, and these are 2 tools that are going to be used for adjusting the turrets. So you have a cleaning cloth and 2 tools. I don't know if maybe there was a mistake. Vortex just decided to double it up. Don't really know, but it's nice to know that it includes all that stuff right from the get-go. And here it is. If you're unfamiliar with the Razor lineup from Vortex, just know that they're the biggest, the beefiest, the most durable optics that they make, but that also means that they're the heaviest. This behemoth with the caps tops the scales at almost 48 ounces. But as you can see, it's still lighter than its younger sibling, the Gen 2 4.5 to 27. Despite the fact this has a throw lever and a bubble level, this thing is still a couple of ounces heavier. I'm actually going to leave this over here so we can compare and contrast a little bit later. Defender scope caps are probably among the best that are out there, with the exception of like Tenebrex. They are fantastic for a couple of reasons. One, they have a really long soft rubber boot that really stays in place. You don't have to worry about this thing shifting on you or coming loose. And they have multiple positions when they lock up. Vertical, half tilt, and fully flat. Need I say more? They're also American made. And if you're in the market for a really good set of caps, even if you don't own a Vortex product, if these will fit, I would highly, highly recommend them. The front only goes to about a 45 degree and then perfectly flat. For the remainder of this video, however, I am going to remove them because they don't serve a purpose other than just getting in the way. Starting at the back with the fast focus eyepiece, you'll very clearly see it is very reminiscent from all the other Razor HDs we've ever looked at, with the exception of the Gen 1 that was a slightly different design. However, I've never, ever seen these hash marks on the body of the rear ocular housing before. That's really cool, because if you want to just put a little pencil mark over there, you can easily see exactly where it is for your eye. This way, in case it does get bumped, or if you're changing shooters, or maybe you're changing positions, and it gets a little wonky, you can pull off your cap, make a quick adjustment, and then you'll know it'll be perfect for your eye. Pulling this all the way back, quarter turn in, absolutely rock solid. I expect nothing less from Vortex, especially at this price point. However, I'm still curious why they don't just do a regular locking eyepiece as opposed to a fast focus eyepiece. But I guess, like I said, they want the option for you, the shooter, to be able to go between different shooters, or if something happens with your eye or whatever the case may be, you at least have the option to do it toollessly and very quickly. It is nice and tight. The only sound I hear is the seal inside, but beyond that, this is fantastic. From there, we're going to check out the magnification ring. It goes from 6 to 36, exactly 180 degrees, which is standard across most optics. The same can be said for the Gen 2 Razor. Just like all the other Gen 2 Razors I've ever got my hands on, the feel of all the components are top tier. But usually they didn't cost top tier money. These were like $2,000, I think, at the most when they first came out. And like I said, you could find these things from like Liberty Optics and a couple other distributors for not too much far off from like $1,600 brand new. Used market, you could look to spend about $1,300 on one of these depending on the reticle. But with this thing, it's absolutely tier 1 money. $3,000 is nothing to scoff at. Yeah, you might be at home laughing saying, I paid $2,300 for it. In which case, good for you, you got a hell of a deal. But is it worth it? Well, we're going to continuously try to find out. But for right now, so far, everything feels exceptional. And like I like to see with all other optics, at least there's some sort of uniformity between all the controls. The splines on all of this look identical, with the exception of the illumination controls. This way you don't confuse yourself about where you are. Speaking of that, let's unlock and twist this thing to see how it feels. A little bit of play back and forth inside the detent, but just like you would expect from a Razor, the detents are basically perfect. Good solid feel. And guess what? If you're worried about this thing coming loose, you lock it in place. You never have to worry about that thing coming undone again. The nice thing about the Razors is that with the locking illumination control, you can just lock it, and then you just take your Vortex tool or a coin, and you can unscrew the battery compartment as you see fit and not have to worry about trying to hold multiple things at once. There is no battery in this yet, but we have 6 fingers, good contact pad, and a nice big O-ring and positive pressure spring to ensure this battery doesn't go anywhere. As nice as the illumination control is, the next thing probably is one of the best parts about this Razor, and for a couple of different reasons. One, this thing goes down to 10 yards on the side focus, and you could see infinity is right there, just ahead of 1,000. So you can really fine-tune this thing quite far because you have such a long sweep on this side focus. It's also very well damped, very tight. As is right now, if this thing doesn't loosen up, you don't have to worry about this thing coming loose on you at all and messing up your focus. However, you can very clearly see from 10 yards to 100 yards is almost, if not exactly, 180 degrees. So a lot of your adjustability is going from 10 yards to 100 yards. Something tells me if you're buying a 6 to 36 powered optic, you're not really going to be doing that much shooting inside of 100 yards, so why give that much adjustability? I'd rather the adjustability be from there to there. That's still more than 90 degrees. It's like 95 degrees, so I guess it's better than most other options, but if you're dialing in at long distance, I would like the ability to really get it 100% perfect. Up next are the turrets, which of course are locking, very tightly locking. We do not have a line in between the cap and the body when they're unlocked, so you do have a little bit of a gap in here, probably about 1/8 of an inch. I don't know why they wouldn't just continue this white line up under the cap so you know exactly where it is, but let's say you're doing this with your eyes closed. You can very easily count and feel that. Very little wiggle once you're in the detent. Almost no backlash. Holy cow, those feel and sound incredible. Unless you're trying to be pretty covert, because clicking this will alert your enemies probably 50 feet away. These are really tight, but offer excellent feel and audible feedback. And the lock is rock solid. You never have to worry about this thing coming loose on you. In fact, getting it unlocked will be challenging enough. The exact same style turrets are found for the windage as well. Lift to unlock. Again, no white line under the cap, whatever. And then make your adjustment. Very clearly to the right and very clearly to the left. 5, 6, 6.7 mils to the right. Wow, these are friggin' tight. 5, 6.7 mils to the left. Phenomenal. All right, this unboxing segment has gone on long enough. So long, I actually finished my cup of coffee, but that's besides the point. If you're like me, you have one question, maybe two. Maybe you already own a Razer HD Gen 2 4.5 to 27 by 56, and you're wondering if the Gen 3 is a big enough step in performance to be worth justifying the extra cost. Or maybe you want to buy one of these and you're going to figure out if this is worth twice the price of one of these, whether it be new or used. Well, that's what we're going to find out. That's going to be the basis of this video, because the Gen 2 Razer HD 4.5 27 by 56 is a benchmark. Whether it be new or used, it is a phenomenal optic, albeit extremely heavy. But you might be trying to get into PRS or F-class or long-range shooting, in which case you want a heavy optic because you want a heavy gun to lessen recoil. But maybe you want the extra little magnification to probably stretch yourself out a little bit further or try to shoot tighter groups by seeing a larger image. Well, let's find out together, shall we?
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it because there's a lot to unpack with this optic. Starting with the EBR-7D reticle. It's very similar to the 7C, but a couple of things have changed. They shortened a couple of hash marks on the horizontal line for the windage, and they've changed the way the illumination works. However, you basically have the exact same reticle as far as the fine center dot, and the tree's a little off, but not much. The illumination on the 7C illuminates the entire thing, whereas with the 7D, it's basically just the crosshair, which you will see very soon. This being a first focal plane reticle, we go from 6 to 36, and we can already see that the fine center dot still remains very fine at the center. However, the image already starts to get a little dark. Keep in mind, this is only a 6x multiplier, meaning goes from a 6 to a 36, divide the two, you get a 6x multiplier, so it's not that cutting edge. In fact, that's basically what the Gen 2 Razer HDs were. But this is a 36x max optic, so thus, regardless to what the magnifier is, it's still asking a lot of the glass. As far as the illumination, it gets more than bright enough for basically any environment you're going to run this at. It isn't what I would consider full daytime bright, but it's daytime visible enough to create contrast against a dark target in a dark environment, which you'll see throughout this entire video. And for an MPVO or HPVO of this sort of breed, that's more than sufficient for the majority of people out there. As far as if this runs well under nods, I cannot say for sure because I do not have nods yet, but hopefully one day in the future that will all change. The turrets on this thing are classic Razer HD. They are very big, chunky, and tight on the lockup. Note the rotational indicator on the side. We're only gaining about 16.5 mils because this is set up on a zero cant mount with a 0 for a 22 LR at 50 yards. These turrets are very tight. Hopefully for Nathan they'll loosen up in time. The only criticism I have is I wish the line continued under the cap so you could line it up a little bit easier to the eye. Razer HD Gen 3 6 to 36. Starting at its minimum, slowly bringing it up to its maximum of 36x here at 41 yards. We could play around with the side focus a little bit. You get only a little bit of purple fringing, almost no green. just a little bit at the bolt right towards dead center. But as you can clearly see, we can get this thing dialed in flawlessly. That is a stunningly good looking image. In fact, to see the entirety of my tracking paper, we have to back it out to about 18x. So we're going to keep it there at 36. Check out the illumination. On full, it is beautiful. Just bright enough for most environments, I would say. And of course, the gradient on it is pretty good to about 5, and then it sort of just tapers off. But I'm sure you could run this thing with nods and have no real problem. Adjusting the zero on this thing was as simple as it could be. Put your turrets on 0, loosen up the socket cap screw on both turrets, then use the quick adjust dials to get it perfect. With that, mini box test time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we are 4 and 4. You can clearly see we have about 1/10 of a mil, maybe 1/2 of a tenth on discrepancy on the windage. Zeroes out just fine, and the elevation looks like it could be about 1/2 a tenth off as well. Let's continue down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to make 10. When I had first set up the optic down here to do the tracking test, I put it at the very far extreme of what I felt was acceptable for the eye relief. I pushed it a little bit too far forward by like 1/4 inch. Bringing it back 1/4 inch basically eliminates the shift to the exit pupil under gradient on elevation. So nothing to really be concerned about as far as gaining elevation and not being able to look through with it. So that's my bad. But regardless of that fact, ladies and gentlemen, we are 1/10 of a mil off on elevation and 1/10 of the mil, just shy of 1/10 of a mil on windage. That's 0 and 0. Let's bring the elevation back to 0, which is right there. You can clearly see it lines up perfectly. I'm going to back out the illumination. I'm going to back out the magnification so we can see the entire target and reticle. As you can very clearly see, it lines up perfectly. What that means that the erector is not 100% set for this reticle. That means if you were to dial with this and dial with another optic to the exact same dope, you might not be on target as well as someone else. That is a kind of a letdown. Let's go back down 10 mils. That is 10 mils. You can very clearly see that it is off. 1/10 of a mil by almost 1/10 of a mil on the windage. For complacency's sake, one more time, 0 and 10. So, proof is in the pudding. After watching the footage numerous times and getting behind it numerous times, it's a little upsetting to see a roughly $3,000 optic not track properly, but it's not the first time that that's happened. Cue in the Gen 2 Razor HD, 4.5 to 27, which wasn't perfect, the Minox ZP5, which did some really wonky stuff, and even the ZCO was a little on the off side. Most manufacturers, if I remember correctly, are within that 1.5 to 2 percentile as far as deviation on your elevation and your windage gains. So across 10 mils, you're talking about 1.5 to 2 clicks to where it's still inside that realm of acceptance. So they could very easily put this on their bench, tested it for tracking, and gave it the old clear. Regardless, Nathan is not the most happy person because he's a perfectionist like myself, and when you don't see perfection, it is upsetting. But let's see if this Gen 3 Razor HD performs better in other regards, so much so that it makes us not worry so much about its tracking performance. And the first thing to really point out, if you haven't already noticed, is the lack of scope body that you see looking through this thing. It's typical Vortex Razor HD, with the exception of the Gen 1s. The Gen 1s, you saw a lot more of the scope body, similar to what you saw with like the older PST Gen 1s, not even the PST Gen 2s. The Gen 2 Razors, whether it be the 1 to 6, the 3 to 18, or the 4.5 to 27, were among the top tier optics as far as view through it and then view of the body behind it. really high ratio, which means that you see a lot more of the image looking through the optic as opposed to the body of the optic itself. And this is no exception. In fact, in person, it is significantly better than what you see here. Now, the image might look like it's jumping around a lot, and that's because of the mirage. I actually closed my window to prevent the hot air from my apartment going outside, mixing in with the very, very cold air, which creates a lot of turbulence and thus mirage. So with the window closed, I know, sacrilege, because it is going to change the quality of the image ever so slightly. But here at 30 yards, we are graced with a very beautiful, sharp image at 30 yards. Granted, through double pane storm windows, but you'll see how bad it gets with the mirage, because the couple of weeks that I had this, every day was well below freezing, and I couldn't do anything to really rectify the mirage the way I needed to for the rooftop segment. When I'm outside, that's a different story, but for right now, it's going to be a limiting factor. But it's also a good test to see how well this optic, or the glass itself, whether it be this one or another one, XRS3, to see how well it can look through the mirage or the turbulent air. I set the side focus to roughly 400 yards, which is exactly what the distance is from the scope to that brick building. So, as we increase the magnification, are we going to have any problems when it comes to the focal point on the side focus? A lot of people don't really care about what the number is, but for me, it's a really nice little nod to see just how well an optic is put together. Some manufacturers don't even put numbers on the side. They just have sort of like pizza pie with a very thin pointing, a very wide section to indicate close versus far. But just for shits and giggles, I set it to what number we have at the current distance to see if it even tracks. I slowly increase the magnification until we get to its top of 36x, and I could really understand why so many people want to run such a larger, high-end magnification on their scope, and we'll touch on that more in the final thoughts, but even just getting a sense of the detail of an object at this distance, it's impressive. With the window still closed, we have a soft image, but with the window open, we have a completely different color palette that goes on. Yeah, when you shoot into glass, that's what happens. But here at 36x, you can see we have a massive amount of mirage. And this is something that you have to take into consideration as well. Let's say you're shooting in a very cold environment, and you're shooting from inside of a house, or a shed, or a little shooting shack that's got a lot of heat pumping in it. You might have the exact same sort of problem when it comes to mirage. So don't think that you're going to be excluded from it even if you have more magnification. In fact, if you have more magnification, you're only going to magnify the imperfections that you're seeing through it and make your situation worse. I backed the scope down to about 25x, and you can see it really does improve to look past the mirage, but regardless, you're still losing about 9x on the top end. That's just completely useless, even here at about 400 yards. If it's that bad at 400, you can imagine what 800 yards is going to look like. It's even worse. Those joists are about 3.5 to 4 feet, if I remember correctly, from when I calculated the dope. So you have a good sense of just how much space is in between that. And once the wind kicks up, it is nearly impossible to see around. Talk about impossible to see around, like we had just talked about on the tracking segment. The eye box on this thing at 36x is exceptionally tight. I mean, you go off in either which direction, and the image basically becomes unusable. However, it's nice to see that the reticle still at least remains sharp. I lied. There was one day where it was above freezing when I filmed with this. It was like 50 degrees, but pouring rain all weekend long. But that still doesn't mean that I can't go out and get some good footage for you guys. With the window open, you can see that we have much less mirage as we increase it to its maximum, but we do have a lot of rain to contend with. However, despite the fact that we're up at its maximum magnification, it looks through the rain very, very well. Our side focus is set just about perfect for our 400-yard brick building, and you can see we're left with a very good and usable image. The light was fairly dim and miserable, and ultimately makes the illumination look even better. This is honestly a very good performance because I was expecting to see a lot more of the rain in between us and the target at 400 yards than what we see here. However, if you want to see the rain to make a better wind call, all you have to do is simply pull back your focus to about 3/4 of the distance and read the wind. But one of the real questions you might have is how much light does this 56mm front objective really let in? It's very clearly a night, late evening. The sun's very clearly set. In fact, it's a little bit darker than what I typically like to film because I like there being a little bit more ambient light, a little more realistic. But as you can see, as we increase the magnification to its maximum, Once we get above 25x, the image gets significantly darker. So if you do plan on running this in a lower light environment, you gotta use lower magnification. Don't expect to really go above 20x and be able to utilize all of its magnification and allow all of its brightness to come in. In fact, what I found to be the best sort of combination to get ultimate brightness, sharpness, and overall usability of the optic, it's about 6 to 25. Beyond 25, it does get a little bit softer and it's a little bit darker, but again, it all depends on your overall environment. If you're in a very bright, picturesque, sunny day, yeah, you could use all 36x, but if the sun's already set or if it's a little overcast out, 36x is stretching it just a little. That is the perfect time to segue into our first comparison. On the left is going to be the Gen 3. On the right, the Minox ZP5 5 to 25. Now, yeah, when I filmed with the Minox ZP5, we had picturesque, perfect early fall weather. You could see the trees just starting to change color. There was zero wind and it was like 75 degrees, beautiful and crisp. So the Gen 3 is already running with a bit of a handicap. When I first reviewed the ZP5, I wasn't as impressed or thrilled with it as I probably should have been. But the more I review the footage, the more I even pull it out and still play with it, because I haven't given it to my brother yet because he hasn't finished his rifle build, the more I kind of like it. It still has flaws, and for the price of its almost $4,000, I think it could be better. But here, just look at the difference between these two images. Granted, there is a 9x difference, but that's a really impressive looking image coming from the ZP5. However, look at the Gen 3 Razr and how much larger the view is looking through it. Both of these are cropped to the exact same size, and just looking through the Gen 3 Razr really is something to behold. It is the perfect balance. Vortex has been so good with their Razr series, and I really hope that they continue to do so in the future. As far as the experience getting behind both of these optics side by side, the Gen 3 Razr is a Gen 3 Razr. It's excellent. The ZP5 is good as well. It's got a fairly forgiving eye box, but honestly, for the money for both of them, I could expect maybe a little bit more. But honestly, I should be expecting a lot more from the ZP5 over the Gen 3 Razr, simply because it's only a 5x multiplier, being a 5 to 25, whereas this is a 6x, being a 6 to 36. But yet, the Gen 3 Razr just seems a little bit easier in the 6 to 25x range as opposed to the Minox. I honestly don't know if someone would be out there cross-shopping these, but they're roughly the same price, they're roughly the same sort of magnification range, and you might decide to go with one versus the other. But just know that the Vortex warranty is significantly better than Minox's, hands down. Longtime viewers of my channel will wonder where the 1,000-yard footage is, because typically above 10x on an optic I will film out that far. But unfortunately with the Mirage, it just kept on delaying my plans. So here we are at 50 yards. You might plan on running this on a very precision rimfire for, let's say, F-class shooting or tactical shooting. And you know what? Here at 50 yards, you can get a damn good image. You can count all the rips and tears in the paper from those little 22 LR holes. And that's honestly one of the really nice things about this optic is spotting your own shots. Here at 50 yards, you don't even need a spotting scope. All you gotta do is crank this thing up and just pay attention. And you can very easily see what groups you're shooting here at this distance. Another topic of contention is the eye box. What does this thing really perform like? Here at 6x, it's honestly like a really, really good second focal plane LPVO at 6x. It's honestly pretty great to get behind. It's very forgiving forward and back and side to side. And that's as much as I could ever really hope for. Just make sure you get a good solid cheek weld and you should have no problem ramping it up from there. 15x still gives us a very good performance. If this is a 3 to 15, this is better than what the 15x would run at. It's very, very usable and right in the sweet spot where I think this optic really performs. Unfortunately, above that, it really gets tight, but I'm going to finish here at 36x because we could be here all day looking at in-between magnification ranges. But at 36x, it is pretty freaking tight. You have to be perfect. Happily, however, the eye relief does not change from its minimum to its maximum, so your cheek weld doesn't have to change, and that's all that really matters. Our next comparison is honestly the one that I think most people are going to be interested about. It is, of course, the Gen 3 on the left and the Gen 2 4.5 to 27 on the right. These are both filmed clearly at different times throughout the year, but honestly the brightness level was about the same, though on the Gen 2 it is a slightly washed out image from what the Gen 3 is. I've really fine-tuned my ability to get all of the camera settings just right over the years. As previously mentioned, the Gen 3 is great for spotting your shots, and here at 100 yards in that shoot and see, it's a joke to be able to spot your shots. However, you could see on the regular paper target down to the right and to the left, those are 22 LR holes. It's not just easy enough to count them, but it's also easy enough to see where bullets stacked on top of one another. And as far as using the reticle to range that, it's a joke how easy it is. The Gen 2 isn't that far behind, but the extra 9x really pays dividend in this really nice, bright, sunny weather. Despite the fact it's cold from the optic to the target, so thus we have much less mirage than what we saw earlier. At 200 yards, we're both focusing on parts of the berm, albeit two different targets. Honestly, the Gen 2 performs extremely well, but not as good as the Gen 3. There's a little bit more life to the image. And again, despite how good the image is looking through the Gen 2, the Gen 3 is a much larger image. The Gen 3 also has a little bit less of the scope body that we see as opposed to the Gen 2. But is the difference enough to warrant the price jump? You can find brand new Gen 2s for like $1,500–1,600. You could find Gen 3s for like mid-2s. You're talking about $1,000 difference. That is a spur mount and $600 left over for ammunition. That's a huge difference. And is it really worth it for you? That's the question. For me, I'm honestly going to probably stick with the Gen 2. It's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit older, but guess what? It's still a really good optic in my opinion. It works perfectly fine, tracks about the same as the Gen 3, has great image resolution, great controls. Yeah, it's got a couple of key differences over the Gen 3, but I don't know if it's worth it for me. In fact, I know it's not worth it for me. I'd much rather have a Gen 2 and extra cash in my pocket as opposed to the Gen 3. Not saying the Gen 3 is a bad thing, far, far from it. The Gen 3 is amazing, but it's just not worth it for me. I'd rather save my money and go with something that's going to perform 9/10 as good, but cost, 2/3 the price. Here's a comparison I bet you guys didn't see coming. It is, of course, the Bushnell XRS3 6-36x56. This was graciously sent in by Patreon provider James, and you will see the full review coming on this, guess what? Just after this one. Give it about a week or so. These are two very similar optics in only one facet, and that is their magnification range. The price point on this is about $1,500. But remember, folks, I have a contact that gives you dealer pricing from Euro Optics, so if there's anything that you like, contact me on my Patreon page, and I can get you in touch with him. And with that, let's get back to the show. 6-36 is the only thing that these two optics have in common. The XRS3 does not have illumination, or at least this one does not. It doesn't have a locking elevation turret. It does not have the same sort of view through it. I mean, just look at the size comparison between these two. These are both cropped 1:1. And the images through them, despite the fact the XRS is pretty good, when it's side by side with the Gen 3 Razor, there is a clear winner here in my eyes. And that's the Gen 3 Razor. But again, you're talking about a $1,000 price delta between these two. So ultimately, what are you willing to spend, number one, and what are you willing to get? Do you care more about the magnification range, or do you want the illumination? Do you want the controls? Do you want the just the feel behind it? Do you want the view through it? Do you want the experience of it? Do you want the one reticle versus the other? For me, the XRS3 is a fine optic, and I'm going to express that throughout the entire review. But when you compare it against something that's supposed to be fairly similar on paper, these two exact in front of you, there's a clear winner. Some people prefer, like my friend N, he prefers the XRS3 over the Gen 3. I think in just like the color palette. But no one can deny the advantages that the Gen 3 Razor has over basically all of the competition, even its own bloodline. Here at 200 yards, it really starts to become even more apparent. There is much more field of view to the Gen 3 as opposed to the Bushnell. Moreover than that, we see a little bit more chromatic aberration creeping through with the Bushnell as opposed to the Vortex. I can understand if you're wanting to save the money and you really think that you need 36x to get the most out of your performance of your gun or yourself, then yeah, you're willing to sacrifice a little bit more to go with, let's say, the XRS3 over a Gen 2 Razr HD. And yeah, there are other options out there, but none that I've got my hands on to really be able to give you an honest opinion on. The gap between these two at 300 yards becomes even more apparent. You can make out technically all the rings on both targets here at 300 yards, and the XRS does look pretty good if you're focusing on just the bullseye. But if you look at the image as a whole, the Gen 3 Razr just absolutely pulls ahead. There's better contrast, better colors, better brightness, and just better old image resolution. You could make out the X in the X-ring, the 10, the 9, the 8, the 7. Those are about an inch or so high at 300 yards. The Bushnell struggles a little bit. This bowling pin is right next to those targets at 300 yards, and again, there's just so much more life to what the Vortex can produce as opposed to the Bushnell. If you have to hunt for small targets or small varmint, damn, the Gen 3 Razr is the one I want to be behind, because I can pick out so much more information and details as opposed to the Bushnell. It really is a night and day difference between these two. My final thoughts are exactly that. They're my final thoughts. You're going to have the last word on what's going to be best for you. Do you need a 6-36? Yes. Okay. What's your budget like? Is it $1,500? Yes. Okay, then this is not for you. Do you need a 6-36? No. Okay, there's plenty of other options even for the same price point. The thing with the 6-36, as I've tried to prove in this video, is you really need the perfect conditions to be able to extract its overall performance. If you don't have picture perfect sunny, bright sunny daylight with no sort of weather implications, then yes, you can extract all 36x out of this thing flawlessly. If you're shooting in subpar lighting conditions or just a real nasty sort of day, let's say like overcast or raining, then the 36x will actually do more to harm you than benefit you if you're just defaulting to going that high. It's like, I have 36x, I must use 36x all the time. No, back it out to like 25. 25, 27x on both the Bushnell and the Vortex is where I found the sweet spot to be as far as maximum brightness, sharpness, clarity, and eyebox between both of those optics, and I do not think that is a coincidence. There's a reason why still so many manufacturers produce a 5-25 optic. A 5x on the low end still gives you a fairly wide field of view to, hunt on your surroundings, to give you a better sense of what's going on for a situation. Be it 25x is just high enough of the magnification range where you're getting a lot of information in detail, hopefully sharpness, clarity, brightness, and contrast to really be able to not only pick out your target perfectly, but make a very precise shot. These 6-36s or even some of the 7-35s that are coming out, they're trying to do the exact same sort of thing, but just give you the option of, when the weather permits, to really extract those extra 9x and perhaps use them for things like this, which is, spotting your shots. Let's say you have a nice 20-40x spotting scope and you don't feel like lugging it around, just buy a 6-36 optic and then just crank it up and count. It's honestly a lot easier and nicer to have because it's always on you all the time because it's mounted to your gun. Whether you're a fan of Vortex products or not, you have to appreciate how good this Gen 3 really is. It's way better than the 1-10 as far as its overall usability. This thing is very clearly usable from its minimum to its maximum magnification, and it does everything it sets out to do basically perfectly. Yes, its tracking might be off by a very minor 1.5% or so, but that's, like I said, within the realm of most other high-end HPVOs when it comes to tracking. If you're in the market for one of these, yeah, I'd say go for it. But you could definitely find them secondhand for a pretty good price. There are some retailers out there that come up with an even better price. I can't really remember what Nathan spent on this, but it was in the vicinity of like the mid-2000s, which at that point, it's a pretty damn compelling option if you need what this thing offers. If not, if you have to try to justify the expense, then I'd say look elsewhere. Go with less magnification, or just go with an older model. Buy something used. There's nothing wrong with a Gen 2 4.5-27 that's secondhand, with the exception of maybe the reticle option. Other than that, though, a huge thank you to Patreon provider Nathan for sending this in for review. The more I got behind this thing, the more I really found myself enjoying it and really appreciating it. At 6x, I didn't show it, but the field of view is better than most LPVOs at 6x. And that's pretty damn awesome. Anyway, Nathan, thank you very much. This is an optic that if you can afford or if you could justify the expense on, I think you're going to be very happy with it. I know Nathan's going to be very happy with it. And that's basically it. With all that, thank you all very much for watching. You and you guys alone are the reason why I keep this channel going. So, thank you very, very much. See you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.